Today we're going to talk about assessing policy alternatives. And on the agenda, specifically, we're going to talk about evaluating criteria for judging policy proposals and methods for policy analysis. Evaluative criteria are the specific dimensions of policy objectives that can be used to weigh policy options or judge the merits of existing policies or programs. Policymakers, interest groups, and analysts often favor the use of one criteria over another without being very clear about why they do so. So the important thing when we discuss evaluative criteria, when we're assessing policy alternatives, is that your criteria, how you choose to evaluate whether a public policy is appropriate or not, will lead you to different conclusions, and it's in large part just as important as problem definition, which we've spent much of the early parts of the course discussing. That how you define a problem shapes the policy solutions that you craft in order to solve that problem. Well, in a similar fashion, what kind of evaluative criteria you use makes a difference in the conclusions you draw when it comes to public policy. So let's take a few minutes to review what the evaluative criteria for public policy might be. And we start with effectiveness. So this is the likelihood of achieving policy goals or objectives. If we're using effectiveness of the policy as part of the criteria, we're talking about uncertain projections of future events. So we're projecting, okay, if we implement this policy, how effective is it going to be in the future? So this one is a little bit softer when it comes to trying to get hard data on its effectiveness when you're projecting into the future, at least. If you have another territory, another state, another country that's implemented a similar policy, and you can look at that effectiveness, you might have some hard data there. Even then you have to define what effectiveness means. Efficiency. So this is the achievement of the program goals or benefits in relationship to costs. Measuring all costs and benefits is not always possible. We don't always see the types of costs that a policy will bring about. There are some things that are not able to be captured, but we can do some cost-benefit analysis. And with cost-benefit analysis, basically you weigh the costs of implementing a program or enacting a policy with the benefits. And when we do this, usually we're talking about monetary costs. So is a program efficient? Is the government sinking a bunch of money into a program that is just wasteful? And a lot of times when we think about government, we think about wasteful spending. So there is, in a lot of cases, there's a focus on efficiency. How do we make programs and policies that are efficient? Equity. So when you're looking at equity as your criteria, you're looking at fairness or justice in the distribution of the policy's costs, benefits, and risks across the population. It's difficult to measure equity, but the idea here is this policy distributing the benefits of the policy in an equitable way, in a way that's fair to the American people? So if you have an education program that is supposed to help fund schools, is it funding schools in a fair way? And if it's not, then we need to change that program, enact new policy, and change the way we fund schools to be more equitable. Liberty and freedom. So we sometimes use this as an evaluative criteria. This is the extent to which public policy extends or restricts privacy and individual rights. This liberty freedom evaluative criteria is often clouded by our ideological positions. What do we view as being free? What do we view as what is liberty? So when it comes to this as an evaluative criteria, you're usually looking at individual rights, our individual rights being impeded on. Political feasibility. Political feasibility is the extent to which elected officials can accept and support a policy proposal. Is the proposal politically feasible? Can you get it through Congress or your state legislature? If you're at a policy think tank and you're proposing a policy that you know the state legislature would never vote for, then your policy proposal doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not politically feasible, and perhaps you need to adjust what kind of policy or program you're trying to advocate for to something that's a little more realistic. Social acceptability, the extent to which the public will accept and support the policy proposal. It's difficult to determine even when it can be measured through public opinion polling. This is sometimes difficult to determine because it depends on salience. If you're talking about an issue, a public policy issue that isn't on the minds of the American people, then they might not understand that policy issue, and then whether they would be accepting of that policy or not is in question. Administrative feasibility, the likelihood that a department or agency can implement the policy. This also involves the projection of available resources and agency behavior. So something has to be administratively feasible. If your proposal to boost education in the state is to hire new teachers, is that actually feasible? And reduce class sizes. What if the proposal, if the state passes a piece of legislation that mandates that there can be no more than 20 students for every teacher in a K through 12 classroom, but then they don't also give funding to hire new teachers, that might not be administratively feasible. Your local school districts might not have enough teachers to keep the student to teacher ratio at the level that would be mandated. So something has to be able to be carried out. You need the bureaucracy to be able to handle it. You need the bureaucrats. If you're going to pass a crime bill that involves putting more police on the streets, you have to hire more police. And if you don't hire more police, then it's not administratively feasible if that's what the bill was supposed to do. So you have to think about that. Technical feasibility, the availability and reliability of technology needed for policy implementation. This is often difficult to judge based on technological change. It's hard to see into the future what kind of technology we'll have that we could possibly use. So you need to be aware of what is technically feasible. You can think about how technology has changed, how we've been able to enforce traffic laws. If you wrote a bill 100 years ago suggesting that we were going to somehow use surveillance systems to catch people running red lights, you'd probably be laughed at. But in today's world, we actually have red light cameras. So you need to think about what technology there is when you're evaluating a policy? Are we are what we are is it possible to do what's being proposed? So I want to talk a little bit before I move on to the methods of policy analysis about how these sometimes conflict, and why this matters as to what kind of conclusions you're going to draw when you're evaluating policy. So, something could be think about different policy issues maybe you care about. Something could be very efficient, save us a lot of money, but it could also impede on people's liberty or freedoms. We can talk about different examples in a more specific context to the policy issues that we're going to discuss in class. So, I'll give you an absurd example to start. An absurd example would be, is it really, really efficient? Would we save a lot of money on Social Security if we just, got rid of all the old people? If the government just said, okay, baby boomers, you're gone now. That would be my father included. Yeah, we'd save a ton of money on the social safety net, but it would definitely not be ethical, and we would definitely be impeding on people's freedoms. And that's an absurd example, but if you just looked at it from efficiency, like, do you want to save a bunch of money on Social Security? Well, get rid of the people on Social Security. Clearly an unethical and absurd example, but it would be efficient. And so you have to think about, how are you evaluating the public policy? So clearly more reasonable example that's far less absurd is offshore drilling. So proponents of offshore drilling use efficiency and effectiveness as their evaluative criteria, oftentimes when they're talking about the benefits of offshore drilling, the funds that can be raised, the efficiency and effectiveness of offshore drilling, the benefits, the economic benefits of offshore drilling. Opponents often talk about offshore drilling by using an equity measure for criteria. The benefit of offshore drilling is given to a few, while society takes on the cost through the environmental concerns of offshore drilling. Think about, think about drug testing. Drug testing people on welfare. You can make the argument that it's a privacy issue, that you're impeding on somebody's liberty or freedom, or it's unconstitutional because of their right to privacy. Or you can also make the argument that it's more efficient if we drug test people on welfare, because we'll save money by not giving tax dollars to help support people who are on drugs. So you see the two different the different ways that you can think about a policy issue shape whether you support a policy or not, and what you consider success. How do we evaluate the success of the policy? Is it about saving money? Is it about serving people more? Is it effectiveness, efficiency, equity? Are we preserving people's freedoms? What are we trying to achieve? And so, evaluative criteria are extremely important, and so is, your method of analysis. So I want to take a few moments here to talk about some different methods of policy analysis. So there are economic approaches These are very popular. They help us understand the true cost of governmental programs and the trade-offs involved to choosing one policy alternative over another. Cost-benefit analysis seeks to determine the benefits of the cost of a policy, of policy options. Cost-effectiveness analysis is similar, compares different policy alternatives that can produce benefit relative to their costs. So there's this one is like cost benefit but doesn't require trying to measure things like the value of a human life, which cost benefit actually would. Risk assessment. The purpose is to identify, estimate, and evaluate the magnitude of the risk to citizens that are exposed to various situations, such as terrorism, natural hazards, radiation, and even threats to financial risk. Decision making and impacts include forecasting. So, forecasting is a procedure for producing factual information about future states of society on the basis of prior information about policy problems. So, you're forecasting into the future. What's the effect of this tax cut? When we forecast, what if we gave a tax cut to, middle class Americans, what is the economic benefit or cost of that tax cut? Impact analysis, analyzing, basically forecasting, the impact of that a policy might have. A lot of times, impact analysis, similar to forecasting, is about something like how many jobs are going to be created. If we build this pipeline, how many jobs will be created? If we, pass this environmental policy, how many jobs will be either created or eliminated or whatever. Impact analysis. And then that could also be an analysis of the environmental impact too. So what does this do to our air, to our water? Ethical analysis. So analyzing the ethics of a policy. Is this policy an ethical policy? Are we impeding on the rights of Americans by implementing this policy? So, the conclusions you draw are going to be different based on how you analyze the policy and what your evaluative criteria are. For example, random bag checking at the airport is more ethical than other ways of doing airport security, because if you're randomly checking bags, then you're cutting down on the possibility of profiling, of racial profiling. And so that's from an ethical standpoint. If you're doing some kind of ethical analysis, you're like, well, that might be a great option for airport security. But if you're looking at risk-based assessment, which a lot of airports around the world do, if you're using that method for policy analysis, you might come to the conclusion that randomly selecting bags to check is not the best way to do airport security, because risk-based assessment would say that you should be checking the bags of the people that are at higher risk of being an issue on a flight, of being disruptive, and so your different evaluative criteria and your different methods for policy analysis can draw you to different conclusions. And in the second half of this course, we're going to be talking a lot about different policy issues, specific issues, and thinking about these kinds of things: problem definition, evaluative criteria, and methods for policy analysis.